Oh. Yeah, I can. Can you see me? Okay. Do you guys have video? I do not see anything.
There we go. I've never had this many cables connected to my laptop, so it's just really kind of crazy here. Is this audio going to be good enough for you guys? Can you hear this? Like particularly Jarrett, can you hear this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it's coming out of my laptop.
Yeah. No, I know. I don't. I can't. I don't know what's. It's not coming through the.
No,
So
I think I think the audio's going through the Elgato, which is then going through my laptop.
So I think if we can work with this, we're going to go with this.
Okay. Are you on wired or wireless?
I'm on a wireless network right now.
Okay. I'm wondering if I should switch to wired really quickly just so it doesn't cut out on my end, at least in the middle of the call.
Okay, if you want to do that,
Sure.
It'll give us a moment to like try to poke on at the audio here, the audio issue.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay. So that was Zach.
That was the interview.
Yeah.
Great job, everyone.
So let me see if I can get. So what I'm looking for is the.
Is there audio?
So I've got the output going. I think that's going to the Elgato.
It has
right?
to.
Yeah.
Well.
I
guess if the microphone picks up the audio, I guess it doesn't matter.
The other possibility is to send it through
both?
Skype. If Skype can handle Skype's not gonna.
In Skype, you can select your output device, so you might do that.
Okay. All right. If this was so, Jarek, you were able to hear that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I would rather go with the thing that I know is working at this point.
Can we switch it in between or like during the call?
So the problem is I think we actually have to reconfigure it, and the thing is we've got the audio going to a stream.
Oh, okay.
And so I don't, and that's working, and that's been the most touchy piece of the technology so far. So that's like one of those things where when that works.
Is there any audio connector that goes right to the speakers?
I mean, it's decently loud.
Okay. Okay, so let me see. And you can see us, Zach?
I can't see anything.
Okay. It shuts itself off and on. There we go.
Okay, now we're back.
All right, so let me see if I can actually get to where I can see. This is me over on the side here.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to the Art/CS 108 class at San Jose State. We've been developing games. We're in the process of finishing our final projects. Many of which end up being video games. We've got a couple of board games as well as like some nice presentations related to like games and game studies as well. And I think we're actually interested in just in your career and in your history with publishing and like just the sorts of things that you've done. So would you be able to sort of start us off by talking about the types of games that you make and the types of games that you enjoy making?
Yeah, I mean, so I've made a bunch of games over the years. I've been making games for a long time, at least 10 years. And that's just in like a commercial sense. There's a genre that we're sort of well known for that I don't know if you can invent like a genre, but like I've definitely like done a lot of games in that style, and a bunch of people hadn't done that before, which are like really open-ended like programming puzzle games. So I'm trying to think. We don't really have to talk about the history of them probably, but like Space Chem was my first commercial game, and that was this kind of like a puzzle game where you're given like inputs in the form of like fake molecules, and you're asked to transform them into outputs, which are also fake molecules, and then you sort of write like a visual program that does it. And it's kind of a game about programming, but it's kind of not about programming. Like it's not like a game that asks somebody just to write JavaScript or something. So we made Space Chem, and that was my first commercial game that I ever made, and that was sort of after making some free Flash games like years before that. But then after that, we made a game called Ironclad Tactics, which is a tactics game, and That didn't do well. That didn't do as well as we expected. At this point, we had scaled up into like a 7-person or 6-person studio. Um, so in light of that not being successful, we made another puzzle game, Infinifactory, which was like a 3D version of Space Chem, kind of. You place blocks and build factories, and it's kind of like programming, but again, it's really not like explicit programming. And that game did well. And so after having 2 games that were hits that were these sort of puzzle games, and then 1 game that was not a puzzle game was a miss, we proceeded to pretty much just make that kind of puzzle game. And so we have 7 games out now. They're commercial. 6 of them are all like in that kind of space of being programming puzzle games. We've sort of found this space where we're able to be successful. And one of the things that's true in business is once you find something that you're good at, you keep doing it, because like to do something else is a lot riskier. And so that's how we've gotten to the point where we make a lot of these puzzle games.
So I guess the first question that I would like to ask to open the floor is what helps you decide when you're playtesting what is a good puzzle versus what is a bad puzzle? Like the puzzles you keep in the game versus the ones you end up throwing out.
So our whole puzzle design philosophy is pretty different from most other people. We don't design puzzles with solutions in mind. It's just like, here's a puzzle. I know you can solve it. It's just a matter of how hard it is or how like bad your solution will be or whatever. And because our games are designed without a specific solution in mind, and like it's not even that they might have 2 solutions. It's just that there's an infinite number of solutions to them. This allows solutions to be better or worse than other ones, and that's what enables like this whole optimization quality of our games. So I guess one of the weird things about this is that like we don't really get rid of bad puzzles, right? Like to us, I guess a bad puzzle would be one that is like maybe like too redundant with another puzzle in the game, that if you solve one puzzle, this like redundant puzzle, like you've already effectively solved it, so there's nothing new to figure out for that. We collect a lot of metrics, and so we can look at all the puzzles in our games, and we can see which puzzles are basically like which puzzles does someone get to, not solve, and then never play the game again. And for us, that's that's maybe a bad puzzle. Maybe it really just probably means it's too hard, or like that's usually what it is. When people bounce off of a puzzle, like usually like if people get bored, I'd say they get bored like sort of consistently over the whole course of the product. When there's a huge spike in people leaving your game, it probably means it's just too hard and they're getting stuck. And I believe this is the case because when we see those, we replace those puzzles with ones that are simpler, and then that sort of smooths out that curve and goes back to like a thing where people just kind of drop off over the course of the game. So that for us, that's what like a hard like a bad puzzle is. Yeah, I don't. If you haven't played one of our games, it's kind of hard to understand, I guess, the ways they're different from like normal puzzle games, because they're similar, but they work differently, like in the minds of our players.
Can you talk about some of the metrics that you collect?
Yeah. So we've been before we did Space Chem. So it's the history of Zachtronics is a little complicated. It's called Zachtronics. My name is Zach, right? Like I started the studio a long time ago. Before it was a studio, it was like a name that I slapped on a bunch of games that I made for fun. So Space Chem was developed while I was working at Microsoft doing something unrelated to games. I would just go home at night and I would work on Space Chem, and I managed to like rope a bunch of like my friends and stuff into it. And when that game came out, that started making money, and then that enabled me to quit my job at Microsoft and then run Zachtronics full time off of the money that Space Chem was making. So when I was at Microsoft, I worked on Office. And one of the things that I got exposed to there is that there's a whole thing built into like all of Microsoft products where they collect a ton of information about what people are doing in the products. And this information gets kind of batched up and sent up to a server. And then people on the Microsoft side of things are looking and saying like, okay, like what percentage of people are using this feature? When somebody uses copy and paste, are they using Control-C, Control-V, or are they going up to the edit menu and clicking copy paste? Or are they right-clicking on it and then selecting copy-paste? There's all this kind of like data that they're collecting about like how people are interacting with the products. And all of the 3 programmers that were working on Space Chem, we all worked at Microsoft, and so we were all exposed to these sort of practices. And we're like, oh, we should do this for Space Chem. We should start collecting data. And this was before I really knew anything about like collecting data in games. And so we just sort of tried to collect what we thought would be useful in practice. A lot of it wasn't super useful. I don't even remember all the stuff we collected. The stuff we collect now, 7 games in, it's 2 big areas. We collect information about people's systems so that we know, like, okay, how many of our players have 1080 monitors? How many of our players have 4K monitors? At some point, we need to start supporting 4K, or at some point, we can stop supporting lower resolutions. We make 2D games, and so that is like the number one thing we care about with people's computers is not how good their graphics cards are. It is how, like, what is the resolution of their screen. And this is the thing that I think most people making games probably don't have to worry about it, because like a 3D game will run at any resolution. You just draw stuff like with more pixels. But like a 2D game, you have to make the assets at a specific resolution. And so we spent a lot of time worrying about like people's monitor resolutions and how to make a game that works across the range that is like common now. Like we recently just switched to doing all of our art at 4K because enough people have high res screens that they kind of look like shit on like most people's screens. And so half the data we collect is all stuff like that. What are people's resolutions? Which settings do they use? We try not to ship a lot of settings in our games, but we can collect information about who's using what settings to know like which settings we should like put more effort into or put less effort into. Sometimes it's just fun. Like in Exapunks, there's some profanity, so we have a setting where you can turn it off, and like 100 people have turned off profanity in Exapunks. And you just wonder who those 100 people are, I guess, that they're like, this is offensive. They went in and turned it off in the settings. So I don't know. You get some insights like that are interesting. I guess that makes me confident about putting more profanity in our games in the future. The important metrics that we collect are about when people fire up puzzles and if they beat them or if they exit, if they never come back after that. We call it bounce rate, right? Which is the percentage of people who opened up a puzzle and then just never solved it and never continued in the game. And that's the thing I was talking about before, where you can see like the spikes, and that's what informs us that our puzzles are too easy or too hard, usually too hard. Yeah, and that's the useful data we collect. We really haven't seen anything else that's relevant. I think if you had like a non-puzzle game and any kind of game with levels, you'd kind of want to know like where are people getting stuck, right? I've actually met a shocking number of indie developers who have no idea how people are playing their game. One of my friends makes a game, and they were adding like a new tutorial to it, and the reason he thought that the game needed a new tutorial is because he just thought that their old one was bad. And it's like, how do you know that the old one is bad? He's just like, well, I don't like it. It's like, you don't know anything, like you don't even know if maybe your old tutorial is great and maybe your new one's actually going to be worse. Like, you don't know. If you don't have metrics, you really know nothing about what your players are doing, right? You can do playtests and you can see like people do stuff in front of you as individuals. But if you really to really have a complete picture and understand like what your game is and how people are using it, you need to collect metrics. But I mean, this is like a thing you do when like you're commercial and you care about it. Like, obviously I made games as like an artist for years, and I wasn't trying to sell them. I wasn't trying to make money. I didn't really care how people were playing them because it just didn't matter. I was just doing it for fun. But when you start trying to do it for a business, it's just or when you start trying to do it like as a professional, I guess it's important to know like what you are doing and what effect it is having, and like make sure that like your assumptions are correct.
Do we want to open it to any questions? I know a couple of people have had some.
Do you have any questions?
You have to come up here, definitely. The hot seat, I guess.
So, I'm currently creating a game that I plan on releasing commercially on Steam, GOG, itch.io, Humble Bundle, and the Google Play Store. And as someone who's as somebody who previously made a game while having a stable income, I'm in that same process, and it's like, so there's no constraints on me needing to finish the game. When did you realize it was time to release it? Or how did you come to that realization for Space Camp?
Oh, so I mean, I've been making I made quite a few games before that. And so for knowing when to release a game, they were non-commercial games, I guess. Mm-hmm. So for the non-commercial games, can you stop moving that? That's making me really dizzy.
Yeah, okay.
Just kind of point it generally in his direction and stop moving. That's perfect, okay. So with the non-commercial games, it was basically just that I released it when I was tired of working on it.
Mhm.
And I'd say the thing that I think that one of my strengths early in my career was being prolific and making a bunch of games. And the way that I did this personally was that, okay, I'm going to get bored of this game if it takes me more than a month to make it. So I need to cut it down to something that I can actually make in a month, like on my own, like, like on nights and weekends and stuff. And so all of my like really shitty old Flash games and downloadable games and stuff were all like 1 month projects. And like Infiniminer, right? Like was like a pretty cool game from like a genre defining standpoint. It was like a month or two, right? I put together most of it. Like my wife went back home to Maryland for like a week, and by the time she came back, I had made most of Infiniminer from scratch, and all of my early projects were very, very short turnaround things. And I think this was important because it taught me how to have the discipline to start and finish something, and that's essential. Like so many people who are just getting started making games like for themselves get stuck. They will never finish anything, right? And that's like the first thing to master is being able to conceive of a game, start working on it, finish it, release it. You don't just like noodle on it forever, right? You get it out there, it's gonna suck, there are gonna be problems with it, you're not gonna fix them, you're gonna put it out there, you're gonna learn so much more by like having people tell you that like all the things that are wrong with your game, and then you're gonna make another one, and maybe you'll try to correct some of those things in the second one. I see a lot of people, even like commercial indie developers, who they'll release a game and it doesn't do well, and then they'll just like keep trying to fix it. It's like, no, you already like you've made all of your mistakes already. You can't undo it. Like you made so many choices. Like over the course of making a game, you make so many choices. You can't change them after, right? Like you've made like a million decisions. Like you've made all the choices. Just move on. You made a game that didn't do well. Like next time you'll try again and try harder.
Yeah.
Like so with those games it was about just getting it out before I got bored, because that was really a problem. Space Chem took a year, so at that point it was like, okay, this is about like, and that was the first time I'd done like a marathon game rather than a sprint game, right? It was like, okay, we actually have a lot of stuff we want to do. It's going to take multiple people. Like it's like we had to like kind of go slow and steady and then like actually make this game and ship it. Did some testing and stuff. I don't know, it's ready when it's like the thing you want to release, right? Like it's tough now because like there's a lot of really high quality indie games, so anything you guys make is gonna like probably look like shit compared to that, right? And it's gonna be like, oh, it's not at that level, and it's like you kind of can't, you probably can't let that hold you back. I don't know. Like it's ready when it's a product, and it's ready. And honestly, I mean, like there's tons of successful games that release when they're in like early access and they're completely unfinished, right? And it's okay because people really want the game. There's no right answer to it. I mean, generally speaking, I think you can only sell stuff if people want it. Sometimes you can make something that's super polished and finished and no one wants it. Sometimes you can make something that's completely unpolished and unfinished, and so many people are like insanely hooked on the idea that they'll play like a really shitty, like broken early version of it, and they'd be more than happy to give you money for it. Right? So it's not like no one cares whether your game is finished or polished, or like you have some notion, everybody else has some other different notion of like what finished or polished or all that looks like. The only equation is like, do they want what you're offering, and will they give you money because they want it? Mm-hmm. And that's like a general thing you're probably going to hear me say through this, is that's the only thing that matters, is making something that people want in that moment. Here's the proposition, take this, give me money, like yes or no. Right? That's the only thing that matters. And I think it's a bigger thing, it's a bigger idea, but like it's also an answer to your question.
So I guess piggybacking on that somewhat, or at least the concept of my game. So do you have any tips for when you first published Space Chem? Dealing with publishers, marketing, anything in that realm of release?
Oh yeah, totally. Like fuck publishers, they're not going to help you. Fuck marketing, it's not going to help you. Like it's none of this stuff is going to help you. Publishers want to take your money and give you nothing in return, and marketing people want to take your money and put it up on things that doesn't drive sales. In my mind, the only way to market a game is just to have it be something that people want, right? Because then they'll be like, holy shit, somebody made the game that I wanted, and then they'll tell all their friends about it, and then they'll all get excited about it and play it. And it's maybe like in mobile games, like mobile games spend the sinister, like evil kind, they spend a ton of money on marketing, and at the point where they're just like blasting out ads to a bunch of people. There's a bunch of people who are just playing phone games that aren't discerning, and some of them are going to click on the ad, and they're going to get taken from one game they didn't care about into another game they didn't care about. Hopefully they'll get addicted to it and dump a bunch of money in it to like make up for the fact that they were advertised to, right? But like the whole mobile game business is built on the fact that like some people are paying like $50,000 of like microtransactions into it, and that's what like props up the whole industry, right? Like those are the people who can afford to market. Like marketing is not going to help you. Like you want to make a game that if you are going to make a game and it's going to be a hit, it's going to be because it was like really like wild and like the kind of thing that some group of people wanted, like they really want it when they see it, right? And that's your marketing is that. Yeah, publishers, like you don't need a publisher. Like this is the easiest time to self-publish your own stuff. They don't. I mean, like it's possible that like you could have a really slick game and then like get like Devolver to publish it, and then they can actually like add some value to that because like people know that Devolver is like a group that like has a certain style of game, but like tons of games that Devolver puts out do not go anywhere, right? They have that like aggressive Devolver advertising, and like nobody cares. Like they don't sell a ton of copies. Like that's totally conceivable. And like a publisher is going to take a ton of money. Like if a publisher is going to make you like a fancy live action trailer for your game, like they are getting paid for that, right? Like. Yeah, I want to add a quick thing too, is that when SpaceChem came out, we went to Steam and we said, hey, would you like to have this game on your store? And they're like, no, thank you. And they turned us down. And so, because that was a thing that used to happen. And so we actually made our own store and just sold it ourselves on our own website. And this was at a time when there were fewer indie games. Somebody from Rock, Paper, Shotgun liked it and talked about it. And then just boom, our sales blew up on our site. And then like the next day, someone from Steam emailed me and was like, hey, would you like to put SpaceChem on Steam? And it's not like that anymore, right? Like anybody can put a game on Steam. Your game will get rejected from GOG. Weirdly, Opus Magnum, our like second to last game, got rejected from GOG after we had at least 4 or 5 games on GOG that were like successful-ish. Right? Like they will reject you because you're not big enough, weirdly, but no one else will. That's just a fun fact.
Have you ever worked with Humble Publishing or anyone from Humble Bundle?
Yeah, they're like a shitty store. I don't know. They the bundles are bundles are weird. Like you don't want to launch into a bundle, obviously. Like you're giving the game away for free, right? There's a lot of people now who will they will give you money in exchange for giving your game away to like an unknown number of people. There's like a huge trend going on, like with all the new stores that are trying to compete with Steam do things where they give away games for free, right? Humble does a thing where they give away games for free, like as part of a bundle. Like a lot of people are trying like Netflix for games, or sometimes they just straight up give away the games for free, like Epic does, to try to like lure people to their store. Like in all of these deals, they are paying developers a fixed amount. They're saying, hey, we'll give you X $1,000 in exchange for letting us give this away to as many people as we can give it away to, like in this like scheme that we have, right? And there's a lot of deals like this now, but I don't even think you're going to have to worry about that because like they only do that for games that are like out and established, and like from the position you're coming in, you're trying to like get it in the beginning, so you're not going to want to really do a deal like that. Probably you just like, I would imagine, sell the game on Steam. You could sell the game on itch, but nobody buys anything there, so it's like, it's cute, it's fun. I don't know. I would only put a game on Steam, honestly. Like a Humble store, you can technically put stuff on, but like that's so much smaller than Steam. It depends on if you really care about DRM free or not, right? Like if you passionately care about having a DRM free version of your game, you can't do that on Steam, so you would have to sell that like on Humble or something.
Yeah.
I guess technically Good Old Games, but again, they're probably not gonna like accept your game unless it's like already like popular-ish.
Yeah, so I'm actually probably not even gonna sell my game. I'm just gonna give it away for free because I mean I'm a 20-year-old student who is making a game within the span of like a year.
I mean, some people make games that are totally sellable. I think in general, not expecting to make money off your game is a good thing. I gave away my games for years. It was a different time, right? Things were different. But that was definitely, I gave away free games for years and was able to build up the beginning of a cult following that is now what drives our like viability as a business. So it's not a bad strategy. But I mean, I don't know. Like you might have something that's like really kick ass and people will pay money for it. Like it's tough to tell.
I want to interject here because chat is bringing this up, but what do you think about kickstarting games?
Oh, don't do that. Like Kickstarter's dumb because a lot of the money that you're going to get is for like physical merchandise and stuff. So it's going to look like you raised a lot of money, but you're actually going to spend a ton of it fulfilling like all of your like backer stuff. And like if you want to do a successful Kickstarter, you have to like you really have to like do the marketing, like the internal marketing, well, not like advertising it or whatever, but like you need to like make it so like people want to buy. I mean, the weird thing about Kickstarter is that like you're offering a product that doesn't exist, right? So I feel like you have to try twice as hard to sell something that doesn't exist, right? Like our games, we just say, here's the game, you can buy it. Like, and then people are like, oh, I want that. And so they buy it, right? Kickstarter's weird because it's like, I have an idea for a game that I may or may not be able to make. Please give me money, right? And like now suddenly you're beholden to a lot of other people. What if you get halfway through the game and you realize that it's actually not that good or it doesn't work like you thought it would? Like, what do? Do you give them back their money? Like, do you just kind of like make another game and like hope they don't get like disappointed enough to sue you? Like, I don't know. I know that some people, honestly, it's not even, I don't even think there's that many successful video games now that are kickstarted. A lot of the ones that are successfully kickstarted are like nostalgia plays, where it's either somebody remaking an old game that everybody already loves and knows they love, and you're just saying, yeah, we're going to just make that again, right? Or it's like some old person from the games business who's just like, you remember me? I'm going to make a game that you loved as a child, but a new one. And like people just throw money at that. Like most of the successful Kickstarters, I feel like the big ones are nostalgia plays. All the ones that I can think of are certainly. Yeah, I wouldn't touch Kickstarter with a 10-foot pole. We use it for, that's a lie. We use it for selling stuff. And so, like, I did a book. Like, I made a book of, like, all of my old, like, design documents. And I said, hey, I made a book. We want to print these. Give us money on Kickstarter, and we'll send you a book. And the book is already done. So it's really just a way to make sure that we get enough orders and to collect that money. Because, like, books are a lot cheaper if you make more of them. It costs basically, like, the same amount to get, like, 100 books and 1,000 books, right? And so, like, in order to make that, like, a profitable venture for us, we need to make sure that we have enough sales. And so Kickstarter is a cool way to have people offer you money, and then you only take it if you get enough orders to actually, like, fund the project. But with video games, like, it's kind of weird because, like, it's hard to actually, like, people don't really realize how much games cost. A lot of the big stuff you see on Kickstarter, that's like, some money is coming from the Kickstarter, and then a publisher is going to like give them the rest of the money because the publisher now feels confident because they raised like a certain amount on Kickstarter or something. And it's like none of that is your business, right? Like you don't want to. You're probably not going to be trying to convince a publisher to give you a bunch of money, and you probably aren't like a legend of the games industry who's going to make a big nostalgia play. Some people are successful in that space. I don't know. I guess it worked for some people, but I wouldn't suggest it. I would never do it myself. We'd thought about it like back when Kickstarter was like a newer concept and you saw a lot of like success stories. We definitely talked internally about whether we should be doing Kickstarter stuff. And we're like, no, wait, that's garbage. We want to make games, not sell idiots games that don't exist, right? And so we hard passed on doing Kickstarter. And I actually feel like we made the right decision because I feel like Kickstarter has really kind of fallen in how people think about that. Like Kickstarter games are now like people are super skeptical of them. And rightfully so. A lot of big high-profile ones failed, and like it was like a studio that like can totally make games pitched out like that fucking caveman game or whatever. Like nobody kickstarted that, and then like their whole company just like imploded after that. So I don't know. That was a rant.
Are there any other questions from the class before I go back to a chat question?
One in the back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
Can you come up to the front because the mics are over here? Don't be shy. They're just microphones.
I'm not going to move the camera again.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, so my question is, I noticed there's like a trend in the developer making puzzle games. Is there like a reason why you chose to go for a puzzle game instead of like other genre? Maybe like for like scalability or profit or something like that?
Oh, I started making puzzle games when I was in college. So this was years before I was even thinking about making any money. It's really like to some degree I think puzzle games are easy to make, but that's not why we make them. I wanted to make games about like programming and like computability and engineering stuff and building stuff, and I sort of accidentally figured out early on like a really good formula for that, and it happens to be like a puzzle game. Our games really aren't even traditional puzzles. A lot of puzzles are about like there's a guy like Mike Sellinger who gives like every year at like PAX Dev gives talks about puzzle design because that's like his thing, and he's written books about it. And like one of his core things about puzzles is that they have to have one solution. And like so right away it's like, oh, maybe our puzzles aren't puzzles, but they're like logical, or not even logical, I don't know. They're like creative problem solving exercises. And I think honestly any game where you have to think gets like labeled as a puzzle, which I think is crazy. Like, but like most games are really stupid and don't require you to think at all. Um, I don't know. Most like game genre conventions and names are pretty like poorly thought of, right? Like people talk about like, oh, like action games versus adventure games versus like that doesn't even mean anything. And then some of them are really specific, like fighting games. Oh no, that's like a very specific genre. And like puzzles, oh no, puzzle games could be like crosswords or Bejeweled, or like there's not even thinking in Bejeweled, right? Like that's just like a do you have like a functioning brainstem kind of game, right? Where you're just looking for like matches and like can you make them match? Like that's so different from like a puzzle game, like a crossword puzzle, like a hard crossword puzzle, which is kind of like this weird like trivial lateral thinking thing, or like a Zachtronics puzzle, which is like breaking problems down into smaller chunks and solving those and fitting them together with constraints. I would say like with regards to how specific like names are, they're just all over the place, right? Some genres are like very focused, some genres are not. Like I kind of think we're at like a post-genre, like we're sort of beyond genres at this point in the industry. Like people still talk about genres, but it's starting to fall apart pretty hard as people make more and more new types of games. Like what kind of game is like getting over it with Bennett Foddy, right? Like I don't even know what you would call that kind of game, right? And like even on Steam, like Steam still has like little tick boxes for what genre your game is, and they're all like horribly out of date. Like indie is a genre on Steam, and like simulation, which doesn't even mean anything. Like all games are simulations typically. Like it's like a fundamental game quality is that they typically have simulations in them, and like they still have these checkboxes, but they've replaced it with a tagging system, right, where people can just like describe the games with how they think, like what tags they think apply to it, right? So our games get labeled as like programming games, engineering games, puzzle games, like really hard games. Like these are all things that people label our games with, and I think like a sort of like that sort of tag system is like a better way to tackle this way of thinking about it. In general, I think people are we're in a moment where people are having a hard time thinking about how to think about games, because one of the things you see all the developers complaining about is discoverability, right? Is that like, oh, Steam's not making it so people can find my game. And it's like, well, we don't even know how to describe games, right? Like, how do we even like relate, like how do we as like a store, how do you recommend a game to somebody based on the other games they've played? Do you just focus on genre, or do you group by genre? Or do people look at genre pages? Like, I think it's actually probably pretty poorly understood, like what drives purchasing decisions of games. And that seems like that would be an important thing to understand, like when thinking about this as like an indie developer. I don't know. It's tough. That kind of answers your question, but not really. No decision that we make is really based on making money. We're pretty bad at that.
Okay, so we got one question here from chat. Is there anything that you would like to innovate in the Zach-like genre, parentheses, I think this is a term that has been used these days, and parentheses, that seems like it might be too risky, or do you just, what? Or do you just take those risks? Or do you just take those risks?
Yeah, so the Zach-like, as it's called now, is a name for like our genre, the genre that I was describing. And we innovate, like we try to, I say we're always trying to update the formula, because there really is a formula and we really do stick to it. And like I don't know if that's, I mean, I guess it's a good thing for us because it allows us to not have to solve every problem from scratch every time we make a game. There's definitely stuff that we've been innovating in. They're kind of boring things, though. Often when you innovate in a genre, I feel like the stuff you're doing is it only really matters to people who are like focused on the genre. We've experimented recently with, like, one of the big things in the Zach-like genre are histograms. Instead of global leaderboards that show you a bunch of scores that are better than you, we show like graphs that show like this is the distribution of people's scores, and you're right here, which means that all of these people scored better than you. And like that was like one of the, like in Space Chem we had that was one of the early things in Zach-likes. And so recently we've innovated with letting people not look at them. which seems like a stupid thing, but like that actually came from like somebody saying like, oh, I hate having to look at all these scores that are better than mine. And we're like, oh, well, they're just a graph. Like it's not personal. And they're like, no, I still feel bad. And so we added a mode to turn that off. And we've also recently added a thing that lets you see, like, I don't want to show people like names next to the top scores because then that just encourages cheating. But we've added a feature that says like, okay, the top, like if you want to be in the top 1% of scores, this is the number you have to beat. And so that's something that we've experimented with and we've kept because it's like, oh, this is actually like a good change. But like that's such a tiny detail, right? Like no one's gonna like buy our game because we've added like a little thing like that. That's just like a small, like really tiny incremental improvement on our formula. In general, I have like a sub goal in my head of wanting to find like new formulas that like are compelling in the way that our standard formula is, but are different in that they're maybe like more accessible or they're more like in the with Opus Magnum, one of our recent games, we made it a lot easier to beat a level, but kept it interesting to optimize it. And I think that made the game a lot more accessible and sold a lot more copies. And so sort of like that, like can we find ways to keep our games interesting but make them like more accessible to people so that they actually like are able to like more people are able to buy the games and play them and recommend them to their friends. Like that's stuff we do think about, but at the same time like it's really hard to do, and I don't even have that many ideas for that kind of stuff, right? I can imagine a lot of stuff that I don't think would work, that I don't want to try, right? So trying to come up with something that seems like it might work, there's I don't know, there's not a lot of ideas on what to do with that. It's hard to come up with that stuff. That was probably more of a question for that person online. Hopefully they got what they were looking out of it, looking for.
We have another question from the class.
Hello.
Hello.
I saw on your website that you only had like 3 educational games. Do you plan on making more?
No. So we made those. We were actually that was contract work we did. So when we did Space Chem, that came out and a lot of people noticed. And we actually were approached by an educational games company that was like it was like a new initiative that was starting up, and they said, hey, we want to pay you to make some educational games, like not like Space Chem, but we think that because you made Space Chem, you could make some interesting educational games. And so we did. They paid us money, and we made those games. And if it hadn't been for those games, we probably would have gone out of business when Ironclad Tactics didn't do as well as we hoped. But we did make those games, so we stayed in business. That project that those games were part of kind of fell apart and they stopped buying games. In the process of making games, I went into it like thinking that educational games would be really cool, especially when we like made them like innovative and not terrible like everybody else. But now I'm actually pretty down on educational games. I think they are destined to be bad and to fail. And I never will make an educational game ever again. With the asterisk that I think the games we make now are secretly educational games, but they're not like educational games. But I think they're better than that because they're about real things. I think that's super important to me that our games aren't like bullshit, right? Like when you do something in one of our games, when you accomplish something in one of our games, like you actually did something. It's not like a game where like just merely for participating, you've leveled up and it's patting you on the back and saying you're great and strong and wonderful, right? Like I try to make our games about like as real as a game can be, which is arguably not very real because they're all made up. But so in that way, I think that the games we're making now are like they serve a similar role as educational games, except they're superior because they're not like beholden to any sort of like curriculum or anything like that. There's a lot more there if everybody wants to talk about educational games, I guess. It's tough because I'm not a teacher and I don't have any sort of like background in that kind of stuff, so I only have this like weird like outsider approach, like game developer, game designer approach to learning stuff. But I've done it enough to have opinions about it, I guess.
Cool.
This is sort of weird that we're rotating through the hot seat here a bit.
Hey, how's it going? A couple weeks ago in class, we were talking about like mods to games and how like independent people will make like GTA mods. And I was wondering like what you thought of that, and then if you could kind of speak on like behalf of like the game industry and how they feel about that.
I'm not part of the games industry. I briefly worked in it, but I don't anymore. Now I make indie games. In general, I think. Wait, what was the first part of your question?
Like how do you and then like the industry feel about like people making mods to games?
I think modding is cool. In general, I think that I'd go one step further, and I think that hacking is cool, and I think that like people like all of our most of the stuff in our games is not obfuscated in any way. We don't really go out of our way to like DRM stuff. I think it's cool when people like take our games and take them apart and change things in them. It's better if they don't like destroy stuff for other people. That I'm not okay with. That's a bummer thing. But like like our save files are like plain text typically. Our like asset file formats they're not like designed to be read by other people, but we don't like make any attempt to obfuscate it. So it's fun when people like somebody in Opus Magnum replaced one of the backgrounds, so it was just Nicolas Cage's face, and then they exported GIFs of like the machines running over Nicolas Cage's face, and it's like, yeah, that's cool. People like there's just all kinds of stuff. Like our games are about people pushing like technical people pushing our games to the limit in the game. I don't know why that would stop like outside of the game when they like do like weird stuff with like manipulating and hacking our game. So generally speaking, I'm pretty cool with that. I think like on PC at least, like the PC games are all about like permissive stuff, right? Like unlike a console, like games have to go through cert, and like you cannot hack your console at all, or they'll like they'll like block you from being able to use it. I think like if you try to like hack stuff on your Nintendo 3DS, they'll just like break it, and then you'll just not be able to do anything with it, right? Like PCs are not like that. There's some DRM on some games, but even now, like I feel like there's a lot of like DRM free games. Like things are pretty open. You can inspect all the files on it. A lot of PC game companies seem to be really open to mods. Steam supports modding as like this first class thing where they will redistribute your mods as part of Steam. Like they'll cover all like the bandwidth and stuff of doing that. They make it easy for game developers to integrate with that. You can look at like the stuff like Bethesda does, like they're super pro mod. Honestly, like most PC game AAA companies are surprisingly cool about mods. And I think it's a good thing, right? Like people like you. One of the cool things is that like the more hackable stuff is, it's okay if you're not able to serve everybody, right? Like if somebody has like some peculiar accessibility thing that they can like, if they're technically savvy or they know somebody who is, they can hack something into that, right? And then like it's cool when like companies embrace that and like extend like the hackability of it. Microsoft has their like accessible games controller now that's basically like, hey, you can like turn anything into input for a game so that you can customize it to your needs. Right. And I see that with our like all of our stuff is that we try to, like we don't embrace like open source stuff necessarily, but we try to I don't know, just foster like that a sense of like openness and exploring how stuff works.
Awesome. Thank you.
But I can't speak for everybody in the games industry.
Yeah. Thanks.
I have one question. Oh, it's okay. I have one question from chat which asks, what games, if any, would you say most affected your tastes as a gamer and as a developer, and how did they?
Oh God, there's a lot of games I liked as a kid and stuff. I don't play any games now, for the record. I'm just not really into gaming anymore, weirdly. But when I was a kid, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know if there's that much of a connection. Like, I played a lot of, like, I was really into, like, Commander Keen and Duke Nukem, like, the 2D platformer games. Like, I've never made a platformer game in my life, and I never will. At the same time, I played a lot of, like, weird educational, like, puzzle games in, like, the 90s, and those probably, like, informed some of my tastes. I was talking to another game developer at GDC, the Game Developers Conference, and she's saying like, like your games are like Opus Magnum really reminds me of like old like edutainment games from the 90s, just like the way that like the UI feels and the way that they're structured. And it's like, yeah, actually I can kind of see that. Like they are kind of like edutainment games for adults. And this is what I was talking about before. I'd never make an educational game, but all of our games are sort of infused with some sort of real stuff in them. So I think those probably had an impact. There's a lot of stuff like Infiniminer was like based on stuff that I was playing at the time. Like I was really into like TF2, and I liked this game Motherlode that was like a flash game about mining stuff, and like I tried to copy stuff like that from those games into my game, and like it didn't work at all because I didn't understand why it worked in that game, and so I just sort of like cargo culted in some of those ideas, and it just made it worse kind of. My games definitely got better when I stopped trying to copy things from other people's games and just tried to like do my thing and make it better. But I'm sort of an exception, I guess. A lot of people make games that are like other games and they do well because of it. see like Wargroove and stuff, right? Like I don't know, people like stuff that's familiar too.
Any other questions here? Yeah.
Hi. So my question is, since technology is evolving and like we have all the latest technology available nowadays, if you were to take puzzles genre game to like the next level, or if like how will it impact like all the new technology, like how will it impact like the puzzles game that you're making right now, like how will you take it to the next level?
Oh, I mean, I think we've actively not done that. I worked at Valve for a year on the Vive. I
Right.
made some VR stuff while I was there. I have no desire to try to make a game like the kind I make in VR. I just think it would make it worse.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's kind of weird. I don't know. I think like in the 70s and 80s, the computer mouse was invented and popularized, and it's actually like the perfect input mechanism for our games. And that it allows you to make broad sweeping motions, and it allows you to select things precisely, and it's pretty easy to use. It has buttons on it, so it's really like really directly control stuff. Like in some ways, like the mouse is the perfect input mechanism for our games.
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I don't know, like cell phones don't help us at all because like people who play phone games like are in a different mindset. They're usually not looking for like complex things, and even if they were, like the interface is kind of shitty for it, right? Like having to physically drag stuff into place. Like we had Spacechem on the iPad, and I'm pretty. It was convenient, but it was definitely worse than on the PC. On the PC, we do a thing in some of our puzzle games where we'll do like WASD mouse controls, but where WASD stuff is hotkeys, so you can like hold hotkeys as you click, and it's actually really fast. It's like having like a 20-button mouse or something, and it works really well. And it's yeah, I have yet to see any technology I feel like that would escalate like what our games are and like improve them in some way through the technology. We take advantage of like graphics cards and stuff, right? Like we write a lot of shaders to do really like pedestrian like 2D effects just because it's easy to think that way. And it's you can kind of accomplish anything. Like we have in Shenzhen.io, we have like circuit board traces where there's like stuff that's animated and moving, and we just do that all with shaders because it's really easy. But other than that, like I don't know. We don't really use that much of the computer.
Cool. I have one other little question. So, during the testing phase of your game, who would be the first and most trusted person you would go to get your game tested? Like the first person or group or
Yeah.
team?
I mean, we have like I have people in my life who are the people I go to first with that kind of stuff. They're just like personal friends, right? Who it's like, oh, this seems like a good person to be the first person to test this. We've actually, with our last game, we assembled like a small group of super fans that we like talked to online and had them test it, and that was super useful. Some people do like bigger playtests. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to do playtests. I definitely like having like small close interactions with people where I'll like watch them play or like just interview them a bunch about like how they feel about the game and try to collect a lot of like information about that. Yeah.
Cool. All right, thank you.
If you're playtesting, you definitely want to watch people like play the game. Like just like force them to say, oh, you can get up and go back to your seat. That's okay. No, I can't even see you that well, so it's okay. Yeah, like it's definitely good to like watch people over their shoulder and watch them play and just see everything they do, because there's so many things that like people wouldn't even realize what they're getting stuck on in order to like self-describe it to you. But if you watch them do it, like instantly you'll be like, oh, they don't see this thing. Like I can see them moving the mouse. So it's cool with a mouse too, because you can watch like where their eyes are going, kind of, because that's where they're moving their mouse. And like we were just playtesting one of our new games, and there was like a button, and it's surrounded by other buttons, and they were like trying every button around it except for the one in the center, and like I could see like what is going on. And then after, I'm just like, so why didn't you click on that button in the center? And they're just like, oh, I didn't realize that was a button, right? And like if somebody had merely reported their experience to me, it would just include an absence of information about the thing that happens when you click that button. But I'm watching them, so I can see exactly what's going on, and like I can even see like where their mouse is going. And once you do this enough, you can kind of start to like get inside people's heads by watching what they're doing. You can also have people record their like their playthroughs and like send you a video, but like, and honestly, it's easier just to get somebody to come in and like do it on the computer and just watch them. That was when I was at Valve. That was all the playtests were like that. Is that they had playtesting rooms, and you would put people down, and you would like watch them as they played, and then you would grill them after and ask them about like what were your favorite parts, what were your least favorite parts, what were the highs and lows of the experience, like how did this work? Can you describe to me like what this was and stuff like that? And that's a big part for me. That's playtesting. Is you watch somebody play your game in front of you, and then you ask them a fuck ton of questions about like their subjective experience.
Another question from chat. This was back when you were talking about. It was like 2 questions back. They asked, "Do you play your own games?"
Not really. I mean, you can't really play a puzzle game that you made for fun. Like with art, I would say like I'm able to play my games for fun more than I would be if I made like straight normal puzzle games. But even then, like it's not the same. I play some of them. I played a fair amount of Opus Magnum. That was the easiest for me to play, because it just kind of, I don't know, making the puzzles is pretty detached from making solutions to them. But in general, I don't really, it's kind of hard to play your own games. Was there a second question in there?
No, that was it.
Oh, okay.
I guess, did you want to say?
So I guess this isn't a really well-formed question, but I'm wondering if you have any experience with Foldit? Yeah. Thinking about that in the context of like both serious games and educational games, and it ends up being a puzzle game as well. But it's really about like leveraging the brain's power and being able to spatialize these things. I was wondering if you had any thoughts in general about that, or
like in what direction? It's funny because one of the guys who works at Zachtronics, our writer, actually worked at the University of Washington and was on the team that made Foldit as like a producer. So I have a bit of exposure to that team and their work. There's actually a paper they wrote about tutorials, which is the basis for all of our tutorial theory. But what do you want to know more about Foldit and like games that?
It's just like you have some very definite opinions about educational games, and I was just wondering how you factor that into it, because it seems to be very successful and has been actually used to solve some serious chemistry problems.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I'm pretty skeptical of that whole line of thinking, I guess, that like that people playing games are somehow going to be better than computers. Like I suspect it's more just like they're a good diversion. They're slightly educational, and that they're like a real life thing. And like the heat from your brain running will heat up your house. You know, sort of human space heater. I don't know. Like I have heard that they did discover some novel molecules from people playing that game, but people are so much dumber than computers, right? Like computers are really good about doing stuff reliably, very fast. They're very fast computers nowadays, if you haven't noticed, right? So it's possible. It certainly makes a good story, right? Maybe like that's a better case study of marketing, right? That is a fucking cool marketing premise, is that you're going to play this game, but you're going to like invent like cures for diseases while playing it. And it's like, what? That's crazy. And it's like, no, it's real, right? And to a certain kind of person, that's like that's the thing that I think a lot of games are always trying to fight, is like games are trying to be more real, right? When you play like PUBG and like you're playing with like you use some feature that lets you play with your favorite streamers or whatever, or like you're connecting with that makes it more real. When you play a game against other people and it's like a real honest to God person that you're shooting in the face, that's real, right? Or when you're playing like a game that's like filled with like a really deep system with tons of items and they all interact with each other in different ways, that's real. And any kind of way that you can make your game seem more real than other people's is probably going to distinguish it in a positive like fashion that will make it more successful. Like if you compare games now to games from like the 80s, they were so simple, they're so obviously fake. Games now are deep and rich and complex, and like they're real in themselves. And so I think the Foldit thing is like that's a novel way to make something that's real. People are always experimenting with like games that tie in with the real world. sometimes they make money and they're like, oh, you can, or games that are like, oh, you can make real money by playing this game. Like sometimes like MMOs and stuff will do that. There was this like, oh God, I don't even know what it was, like some weird like libertarian MMO where like it was all like a real money economy, and some guy spent like $100,000 on a space station. This was like 10 years ago. He spent like $100,000 buying a space station because he's like, okay, I can set up like an in-world like club there, and I'll get like a cut of all the profits or whatever. And so like he was like gonna make money off of it. And it was like super weird, and like that kind of real world connection is compelling. I don't I don't know if you want to go more into
No,
the
that's
question.
fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone did want to ask, are you thinking of Eve Online?
No, it's called like Project Entropia or something. It's
Okay.
I mean like Eve does have that kind of stuff, and Eve is kind of a real world economy because they have like the Plex and stuff that goes back and forth. But this was like some like I want to say it was like some crazy libertarian guy who can like made up this thing, and it was like some weird like Second Life but more intense. I don't know how much of it was like a Bitcoin kind of like a speculation thing where like all the people were dumping real money into it because they thought that it was going to keep getting more popular and that was going to raise the value of the currency. I'm not sure, but it was something weird and not as cool as Eve.
So quick question. When you were making Shenzhen.io and TIS 100, they came with PDF manuals. Was there any reason that you decided to go with something that you encourage the players to print out versus having like a tutorial built into the game?
So there's a manual. So TIS 100 was our first like explicit programming game, and it comes with a manual instead of a tutorial because I had no desire to teach people how to program, and I did not want to try to write a tutorial to do that. Like I don't think you can really tutorialize that effectively, at least with like the techniques we use for in-game tutorials. So it really seemed like it made more sense just to say, hey, here's the manual. We'll structure the manual in a way that scaffolds the information and makes it like easy to understand and teach yourself, but you're on your own. And we made it printable because I don't want to look at a PDF when I'm doing something like that, right? Like having a paper manual means you can like read it in bed or read it on the bus or take it with you, and it's fun and it's a product differentiator, right? And that's like a cool gimmick. And when we launched the game, it was a cool gimmick, and it brought a bunch of people's attention to it and made it pretty successful. When Shenzhen, we took it to the next level. We turned it from just being like a stapled packet into like a binder that came with extra stuff, and you could order. We sold like 1,000 binders that were like came with like extra like physical things in the binder, and it was all like really high quality, and it was like a special custom binder. And then with Exapunks, we did it again, and we took it to the next level, and we made like 3,000 sets of zines, like little hacker zines that were printed, like 2 issues, and it came with extra stuff, and it was like a big deal. And all of those things were cool marketing beats, and they I just thought it was an effective way to like deliver that information. And for the record, I mean, I still think it was like if you're going to make a game about explicit programming, like trying to do like a step-by-step tutorial is just going to be like a shitty tutorial, like it's just a shitty programming learning experience. People who know how to program are just going to be like dragging their feet as you teach them how to do for loops or something stupid like that. Like I wouldn't recommend doing it that way.
Any other questions from class, so I can pull one from chat? Okay.
Yeah, you guys should ask lots of questions. They can be stupid. It's okay. Stupid questions are fun.
Yeah, it is a stupid question because I'm a graphic designer, so I don't know about the programmer. So I want to ask what kind of graphic designer can work with you or the programmer team, the game design team, or they are able to work in game design in company. Because I'm worried about I cannot find a job or I lose the job faster with the programmer.
I would, if you want to be an artist at a game studio, you definitely like need to be making the kind of stuff that people are looking for someone to make, right? And that's why portfolios are really important. Like I've never been an artist, I can't really speak to that super effectively, but like whenever we're evaluating like an artist, we look at their portfolio, and if we see stuff in their portfolio that looks like the kind of stuff we would want them to do, awesome, right? If we look at their portfolio and it has a bunch of like weird character drawings, like we don't want somebody to like, our games are mostly UI, right? Like we don't have that many characters that need to be drawn. Most games don't, right? And so like that's like a portfolio of somebody who's not going to be appropriate like to hire. The whole all the game art stuff is like really portfolio based, right? And it's just about having a portfolio Because like somebody's going to look at your portfolio and they're going to be like, okay, that's the kind of stuff this person is going to make for me, right? And so it's really simple. Like you have in your portfolio, you want to have the stuff that people are looking for. What are people looking for? That's a difficult question. When we're looking for artists, we are looking for completely different stuff than real studios, right? Most games are 3D. Our games are 2D. That's a completely different discipline, right? So I just think that like putting the right stuff in your portfolio, having it look nice. I'm sure artists look for more complex things than that, but like that's the most important stuff. Graphic design is tricky too, because like I like being a graphic designer like as a trade is fine, but like the thing that I'm gonna be looking for in a portfolio is game art, right? Like stuff that goes in a game. And so like that's the kind of stuff that I would want to see in a portfolio.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's helpful.
All right, so we've reached the end of our hour. I want to thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. And I guess we're going to be seeing you again on Monday, right?
Yep, sounds right.
Okay, so thank you very much. All right, I look forward to talking to you on Monday.
Okay, sounds good. See you guys.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, how many stars?
I think a 4. It was a little staticky in there. Okay. As it goes for stream Monday, 6 p.m.
So what did we get anything from that? Was that useful to you guys? I mean, I think it's useful because it's like really nice to be able to talk to somebody who's been through all of this. And I don't know if you realize it, but he's been through every last little bit of it. It seems from making the individual games, which is kind of where you're at this point, to finding his way into like actually getting paid for it. One of the things he didn't